Hi guys, it's Caroline, and today I will be doing my May wrap up. Now, I am in a different location, if you may or may not notice, and that is because last week lightning struck my house and pretty much wiped out our AC, our internet. Most of our TV and like DVD stuff is like fried. We now have internet and we now have like window units, which you can probably hear going on in the background. That's why we're in a different location. But without further ado, I'm gonna get right on into my May wrap up as well as how I did in the AAPI Readathon. First book I read was a memoir called Aftershocks by Nadia Owusu. She grew up in a bunch of different countries, hopped around because both of her parents were divorced, and also they just like held a bunch of jobs internationally. So she grew up in a lot of different places. And so this is sort of a memoir based around the concept of like earthquake and shock and like the sort of the after effects of those things. I gave it 3.5 stars. Like, again, rating a memoir is kind of weird because it feels like I'm sort of rating her life, which I'm not. I'm more rating it on like how captivating the actual writing was, and like I had no issue with it, but I did find myself kind of zoning in and out. I will say, like, in the book's defense, I listened to a very significant chunk of it while running a half marathon. So I was listening to this audiobook, and the first like 8 miles of that half marathon I felt wonderful. So there's that, and then the last 5 miles I felt awful. I read Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. Now, if you don't know what this is, I'm not gonna go really into it. This is like the 4th series in the Shadowhunter thing, and it's the 2nd book of that 4th series, and it was just delightful. I gave it 4.5 stars. I think what I love about this is, first of all, it's set in sort of that Edwardian, Victorian, whatever time period, which I do really, really love. And it's got this magic that I'm like super familiar with because now I've read like 13 books in this whole series, trilogy, whatever. And the angst is so perfectly done. The end of this book absolutely smacked me in the face. And if you've read this book, you understand the tension. Cassandra Clare is known for writing books with tension. And there's a reason why the characters you want to be together can't. And there's usually love triangles, and you want everyone to be happy in that love triangle, and it's hard. And some of the reasons why her characters can't be together, I find annoying. I think the reason Jace and Clary can't be together because they don't know if they're siblings or not, I find that super like weird. That doesn't do it for me. I don't like them as a couple, blah. The main characters in this one, I just want them all to be happy. I know they're not all going to be. My heart is breaking. The end of this book crushed me. I can't believe I have to wait like 9 more months for the next book. 4.5 stars. Next, I read Root Magic by Eden Royce, and this was a middle grade book about Gullah culture and root magic. So basically there are these 2 twins and they go to school in Charleston. They live kind of near Charleston in a more Gullah area. And their father has left them a while back. They're being raised by their single mother and her brother. Their grandma has just died, and their uncle decides it's time for them to start learning about root magic. I thought it was cute and charming. I don't know that it was the best written book I've ever read. And like, it was really, really fast paced, which for a middle grade, like, makes sense. But I have read middle grade that was like better paced. So it's like, I can't blame that all on the like category it was in. But I did really appreciate it, especially because I grew up in South Carolina, in the coastal region, where Gullah is still something that we learn about, something that I come into contact with, but not something that I really see in mainstream literature. So it was really nice to have. Glad I read it. 4 stars. I read Such a Dark Horse. I didn't think I was gonna dislike it, but I did not know that it was gonna be like so good to me. And this was A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. George Saunders wrote Lincoln in the Bardo, which I read and did not particularly enjoy. So the idea that I was gonna pick up this like nonfiction book by George Saunders, I just like wasn't all that sold, but I said, why the heck not? So what is this book? It is 7 short stories by 4 Russian writers, and Saunders just takes them and like decomposes them, breaks them apart, talks about the composition, what makes this a good short story, why is this paragraph here, why is this sentence here, why is this word here. He goes in depth and he just tears them apart. It was so fantastic. George Saunders teaches an MFA course at Syracuse that basically does this, but with like 30 plus short stories. And he just picked 7 that he thought were the best. Some of them he like makes notes and like asides while you read the short story. Others you read the short story and then he has stuff and then he has a little afterthought. It was wonderful. I gave it 5 stars. It was my favorite book of the month. Absolutely loved it. And like, I was not expecting that in the slightest, but I'm so glad I read it. Next up was The Library Book by Susan Orleans. I read a ton of nonfiction this month, which is totally not my usual. This is a nonfiction book about a fire that happened at a Los Angeles Public Library. It's sort of both about the history of libraries and the Los Angeles library system in general, as well as kind of an in-depth dive into the guy that they think did it, although I don't know that he was ever actually like put in jail for it because they could never like fully prove it. I thought it was interesting. The subject matter was interesting. I thought this book was really poorly constructed, which is why I got 3.5 stars, despite the fact that it was very interesting, a subject that I care about and found interesting. Basically, it just had no logical progression. Each chapter like had no reason for being where it was. Like, it wasn't chronological. It wasn't like, here's all the section about like women in the library. Here's the whole section. It was just completely all over the place, which means I have such a terrible time understanding the chronology. So I think that's like a real downside to a nonfiction book, is like organization and writing is a huge part of it, because like to a certain extent your subject matter can only be so interesting. Next, I listened to Infinite Country by Patricia Engo with my mother on a car drive, and it's really super short. It's about a family that's separated by the border. Basically, this couple comes. Not all 3 of the children were born in the US. I believe only 2 of them were, and then the father gets deported. She decides to send the one who's a newborn back because she just like can't take care of a newborn and work. The girl has been put in sort of a correctional facility because of this incident that happened. I thought it was interesting, but my mom and I both felt like this was a short story that tried to become a novel, and maybe there wasn't enough story to actually make it a full novel. So then basically towards the end, we started to get points of view from the 2 siblings, when from the beginning we were really only getting points of view from the parents and the daughter who was escaping from the correctional facility. And it was very hard to even understand in the audiobook that the narrator had changed to someone that wasn't one of our normal narrators. To me, I wish she just would have made this like a longer short story or a novella. So for that, it got 3.5 stars. Then I read The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, and this is a book that's dual timeline. One is a long, long time ago, I think in like the 1600s, and this woman has carried on the legacy of her mother, who was this apothecary who has died, but the woman decides she's going to also make poisons for specifically so that women can use it to like escape bad situations. Other is this woman who studied history, didn't get her PhD or master's or whatever because her husband was like, no, let's focus on my job. She like has some job with her family that she doesn't find satisfying. She's maybe unsatisfied. They're about to go on their 10th anniversary trip to London, and she finds out right before that he's been cheating on her. She goes alone. I really liked the apothecary timeline. I did not like the current day timeline. I found that woman annoying. I don't like cheating plot lines. Like, it's just not fun for me. I just didn't care. I was like, oh my God. And I don't know that I really got with the message, and then everything wrapped up too neatly, and it just felt like one of those books that was like trying to sell you a message rather than a story. So I gave that 3 stars. Then I listened to Chemistry by Weike Wang, and this is a memoir, but a lot of people have described it as very similar to Weather by Jenny Offill, which I completely agree with. And this is a memoir about a woman who is like in the chemistry, like getting a PhD, I believe, in chemistry, and is sort of having like mental issues, anxiety, stuff like that, difficulty talking about it, a lot of pressure from her parents. She's got this boyfriend whom she really likes, but like she's not as like open as he would like, and she's just dealing sort of with the pressures of being an Asian woman in her PhD program, the pressures of her PhD program, and also the fact that she's like having such trouble communicating with this person that she loves. I found it really interesting and touching. I think it was like the right length. It really did have that weather Jenny Offill feeling, which I do like. I don't want to read a ton of it and I don't want to read it all the time, but when I do pick it up occasionally, I enjoy it. Gave it 4 stars. Then I read Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner, who is also known as Japanese Breakfast, who's sort of an indie pop star. Now, this is her memoir. It's a collection of essays about her dealing with the grief of losing her mother. And like, for context, her father is white American, her mother is Korean, and she kind of had a fraught relationship with her parents growing up. But one of the things that they could all kind of connect on, and what she specifically connected with her mother, was like food, exploring food, but also Korean food, going to Korea and eating all this Korean food. And so the mom is diagnosed with cancer, and it's sort of this rekindling. They had kind of a rocky relationship that they're trying to mend. I found it really interesting, really touching. I don't know that it was the most beautifully written. The other thing that I found so weird is there's almost like zero acknowledgement of the fact that Michelle Zauner herself is like famous. It briefly comes up in the very last essay. She says Japanese Breakfast like once. So I just thought that was weird. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read The Silence of Bones by June Her. This is set in the Joseon era in Korea, which is like centuries ago. And it is about a orphaned girl who is part of the police force as an indentured servant. And her job is to deal with like female victims, female corpses, because the rule at the time is that men could not touch women who are not like their family members. These killings start happening that seem to be related to Catholicism. Things get complicated when she thinks maybe her like superior police officer, captain or whatever, is suspected and she really likes him. Let me tell you, this book did not do it. I wanted to like this so badly, and it really missed the mark for me. I had such a hard time following what was going on. I felt like the characterization of our main character was completely inconsistent. I found it very difficult to follow the plot, and maybe that's on me. Maybe I wasn't reading it engaged enough. Then when you start to like reveal and find things out, I thought a lot of stuff was far too convenient. Annoying to the point where it's like 50% through, you could see at least one of the convenient plot lines coming to fruition already. And I was like, oh my God, that's so convenient and so annoying. That must be a red herring, because like, there's no way. And guess what? There was a way. I gave that one 2 stars. I wanted to like it. A lot of people really like this book. It just was not for me. Then I read Home Fire by Camilla Shamsi. And this is a book about, it's complicated. They live in the UK. I'm pretty sure they're from Afghanistan. Basically, the father was sort of this jihadist at one point and like was classified as a terrorist. Brother at like 17 or so decides he's kind of been manipulated into thinking, your father's been wronged, you've been treated poorly just because of what your father did, and he really like had his people in mind and like, you should join us. And so he goes off to join them. He goes and he decides like, this is not for me. The twin sister knows that, wants to get him back. The older sister's conflicted. She's like going to America. She meets this guy in America who is the son of a really politically powerful, and he is also Afghani, and he can she wants him to help. It's almost impossible to describe, you just need to read it yourself. I think it really interrogates these ideas of terrorism and xenophobia and stuff like that, particularly in the US and the UK. It definitely made me frustrated, but not because the book did anything wrong, but because I was frustrated with understanding that this situation was totally a possibility. But I did like how it ended. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Heartstopper Volume 2 by Alice Oseman, and this is just about Nick and Charlie, who are 2 boys in high school. In the first one, they start this budding relationship, which is sort of unexpected because only one of them is out. This book is sort of focusing on, okay, they've established we kind of have a relationship, but the one who's not out is sort of uncomfortable with coming out or isn't quite ready to fully come out. And so it's about, that process. I thought it was really sweet and really touching. It's just brain candy. It's a mood lifter. It's cute. There's nothing much else to say. These are cute. Can't wait to continue. Okay, I gave that 4 stars. Then I read The 4 Winds by Kristen Hanna, which I gave 4.5 stars. This is her latest book. She wrote The Nightingale, which you're probably familiar with. This is about Great Depression era in the West. It's a girl who lives in the Midwest, and she kind of gets into this marriage. She has kids. She's working on this farm. depression hits, and it's just all about the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression. And it really focuses on the strength of women, because I feel like a lot of times we learn about the men, but we also tend to shove aside the women who were doing just as much farm work on the farm and were hit just as hard when the Dust Bowl came through. And so I just think that this was really touching. Now, this is not a book that'll make you feel warm and fuzzy inside. It is bleak. It hurt. It was not a good time. It also deals a lot with like communism. And I thought that that was dealt in an interesting way, because in this book, I don't think particularly that Kristen Hanna is like pro-communism in any sense, but it talks about, like, it shows why these people might have been pro-communist, like in California picking fruit, like why that was appealing to these workers who were basically getting like abused and used by these like farm owners. Anyway, I thought it was really interesting, really well researched, and just like a good read. So 4.5 stars. Then I read Imposter Syndrome by Kathy Wang, and this was a book that I am going to do a full review for Harvard Review. And this is a book about a woman who is a Russian spy who ends up being the CEO of a tech startup in Silicon Valley, and she's funneling like stuff that's supposed to be private to the Russian intelligence. And it's also about Asian American girl who is like way lower in the ranks, who is supposed to just do like routine security, and catches that the COO is like funneling information, accessing information she's not supposed to be accessing, and what to do about that. This is kind of billed as like a Russian spy novel. And I mean, like, technically it is, but if you're like a big fan of like Jean Le Carré or, you know, one of those things, like, this is not the book for you. This book uses spies and uses tech, not in a way that people who really love books about tech or really love books about spies, it's not made for you. It's made for the average consumer who is going to find it funny that those things are being made fun of. It is not a classical spy novel. I think it ends maybe not in the most like satisfying way as well, which was an issue for me, especially because I felt like there was just so much buildup and it was sort of anticlimactic. But part of that is because this is not a book that was made for plot, despite the fact that its genre seems to indicate that it should be. Yeah, I thought it was cute. I thought it was funny. I thought it had some interesting things to say. I just don't know that this plot blew me away in any sense. So I gave it 3.5 stars. Next up, and I promise we're almost to the end, is Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. I gave this 4.5 stars. It's about an island where people just like in like masses forget things, and the memory police come through, and people who aren't forgetting the things, those are the people that get detained and presumably killed. It's sort of this metaphor for living under a totalitarian regime. And I don't know, I found it deeply touching. It's a very sparse novel, and if you want to get like secondary meaning out of it, you really have to pay attention. But I thought it was beautiful. It was well written, and I just like, it was the kind of book that like, if you wanted to just zone out and read it for its face value, it was very interesting and entertaining. And if you wanted to dive deeper, I think there's a lot of like very nuanced discussions you can have after reading this book. Like, it's a great book for a book club discussion or reading for a class, but it's also just like a quick read. 4.5 stars, really enjoyed it. Then I read Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi. And this is a YA contemporary, or it might be considered new adult, about two sisters who don't really get along. They both live in New York City. They're in their early to mid 20s, and one's at school and the other one is like working this high-powered job. They sort of run into each other. It becomes clear that the older one has some sort of cancer, but she has to use her younger sister's name to use her health insurance. Also, our main character is dealing with an eating disorder. I have really complicated feelings about this because I felt some of the scenes went on far, far too long. And I felt like this book was comprised of like 15 scenes and that was it. And yet it was like a 15-hour audiobook. So for me, I felt like after a while, I was like, let's move on. It was really hard to read about their relationship. It was very stressful to see how much these two like went at each other. I think the way the eating disorder was portrayed was like accurate and like well done, although someone who like suffers from that eating disorder probably has a better like Own Voices review. I will say it was like there, it was present the whole time very quietly, and then towards the end the way the end dealt with it made it seem like this whole time this was the like main point of this book, was to talk about this eating disorder, when it really was like such a back of the thing for the longest time until right at the end. I gave it 4 stars. I have complicated feelings. Sometimes I really loved it, and sometimes I was like, ugh. And then last is The Night Tiger by Yang-Si Chu. This is a book about a brother and a stepbrother and stepsister, and also a little boy. The stepsister finds is given like a piece of finger, and there's all this like stuff to try to find this finger. There's also like a tiger out on the loose that might be like a were-tiger, but also might just be a tiger that eats people. Yeah, I dislike this greatly. First of all, I had difficulty as all heck understanding the plot. There was stepbrother, stepsister romance that I really could not get behind. And they were raised from being young as brother and sister. It's not like they met at like 25. And they're born on the same day, so they often tell people they're twins. The brother was extremely possessive in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable, and it was like not a healthy relationship, even if you took out the weird stepbrother, stepsister aspect. And I thought the mystery was confusing, and then when I got the end, I thought the like payoff was really bad. I think I fell asleep listening to the audiobook at one point for no reason other than the fact that I was so bored. I felt that it had some like things that I didn't really love. I think there was a lot of judgment of other women. I don't know. There was a lot of what I felt like was slut shaming. There's a lot of weird stuff from the brother about like virginity, like, oh, you're still a virgin, I can tell. Like, boy, what does that mean? I don't know. I had a lot of trouble with it. So that's my review, 2 stars. 8 of my 17 books that I read this month were by Asian or Asian American authors, which I feel pretty good about. I did complete that they're all from different nationalities. I had Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Afghani, and Malaysian were, I think, the 5 that I read. I feel happy about that. I feel like I completed the readathon. I love that for me. This is a really long wrap up. So yeah, I'm gonna go. Bye.